The railroad landscape in North America has just changed for the first significant time in decades, with Canadian Pacific's acquisition of Kansas City Southern creating a new railroad, CPKC. First announced by CP in 2021, the merger was approved a couple years later and finalized on April 14, 2023. CPKC's network, featuring historic railroad lines from its predecessors, has created a unique system, today's only Class I railroad directly linking Canada, the United States, and Mexico with extensive trackage in each country. Those shipping products by rail between the countries now have a direct single-line alternative to using multiple railroads, and CPKC has advertised this advantage with the creation of new trains serving the North-South International Corridor. Throughout this program, we'll observe the trains of the corridor primarily in the central Midwest, starting with a look back at the years leading up to the merger, followed by today's operations, including a celebratory passenger special run by CPKC in the spring and summer months of 2024. CPKC's route between the Quad Cities and Kansas City has risen to prominence as one of the most important pieces of railroading for the new company, since this is the line that connects the systems of Canadian Pacific to the north to the former Kansas City Southern lines to the south. Even years before the merger, this route was still an important leg of the CP system, as we'll see now in our look back. The Ottumwa subdivision, like some other CP tracks in Iowa, Missouri, western Illinois, and southern Minnesota, were acquired in 2008 after the purchase of the Dakota, Minnesota and Eastern and Iowa, Chicago and Eastern railroads. Years ago, these lines were run by other carriers such as I&M Rail Link, Soo Line, and most famously, the Milwaukee Road. Running in an eastwardly direction is CP's northbound oil train 575 on a crisp day in late March 2019. We're east of Ainsworth, Iowa, on the Ottumwa subdivision, on a portion of trackage that was originally part of the historic Rock Island system. The Milwaukee Road purchased this segment after Rock Island's demise in 1980 as a shorter route between Washington, Iowa, and Muscatine. On today's train, we see a blue CEFX diesel in the lead, with another trailing on the end. During this time on Canadian Pacific, after the disposition of most of their former DM&E and IC&E SD40-2 locomotives, a varied mix of power could be seen on freight trains, including units from other Class I railroads, as well as lease engines. "15 miles up the line, we're in Letts, outside Muscatine, as 575 takes the siding to meet a southbound train, mixed freight 474, already waiting on the main. With the line clear, 474 begins south, and we take chase to follow it back towards Ottumwa. Leading this train is an AC 4400 CWM, sporting its new paintwork, and was one of many diesels that were being run through an extensive rebuild project at the time. The M overhauls brought existing AC 4400CW locomotives up to more modern specifications, including new electronics and a new cab based on the successful Evolution series locomotives that are still produced today. At Cotter, the trains leave signaled territory and continue on track warrants the rest of the way to Ottumwa. Today, CPKC has extended CTC signaling all the way to Ottumwa. These old searchlights would continue to operate right up until 2023, when the signal extension project took place. In Washington, facing east as 474 approaches, we can get an idea of what railroading was like here in years past. Originally, the Rock Island and Milwaukee Road main lines crossed each other in front of the Washington Depot. After Milwaukee Road took over the piece of Rock Island main line between here and Muscatine, they abandoned their own line between the towns that continued off to the left. A portion of this track still existed in Washington as a series of sidings until their removal by CP several years ago. Out in the country north of Packwood, we bid farewell to 474 as the train continues down the line towards Ottumwa after sunset. Ottumwa, Iowa, the county seat of Wapello County, is one of the largest communities on CPKC between Davenport and Kansas City. It's also a significant point on the railroad, with the Ottumwa subdivision ending here at the former Milwaukee Road rail yard across the Des Moines River. Being a division point, all trains stop in the yards for a change of crews. As we continue our look back at the trains prior to the merger, we're going to follow us southbound through the rest of Iowa and into Missouri on the Laredo Subdivision. Our train arrives in Ottumwa after dropping down Rutledge Hill as it approaches the yard on the last couple miles of the Ottumwa subdivision. This is another day's 474 from March 2019 and is a great example of a train from this time period with no CP diesels in sight, this one featuring 2 units from CSX and Norfolk Southern. As 474 continues into the yard, we see the tail end of the train as it completes crossing over more railroad tracks. This is BNSF's Ottumwa subdivision, not to be confused with the CP track of the same name, and is a double-track main line, a portion of BNSF's route between Chicago and Denver, with other lines reaching up through Nebraska to Wyoming's Powder River Basin. This region produces coal trains, making up the majority of traffic seen on BNSF through Ottumwa. Some of these trains are interchanged to the CP just past this spot, and crews take them north to one of 2 different power plants along the Mississippi River near Muscatine. After a couple of hours, the new crew on board 474 has completed some switching in the Ottumwa yard, and their newly assembled train can continue its journey out of town and on to the Laredo subdivision. This portion of the line is exclusively track warrant control, also known as dark territory. There are no signals governing traffic, so train crews must copy a track warrant from the dispatcher that allows them to occupy a designated section of track. No other trains can occupy this segment until the crew lets the dispatcher know that they're clear. While it may sound a little scary to be operating on track like this, modern overlays such as positive train control provide an additional layer of protection should there be any miscommunication. When enabled, PTC detects the presence of other trains and can automatically apply the brakes in an emergency. North of Moravia, at a point known as Foster, the railroad crosses a series of 3 trestles over the rolling hills west of Blakesburg. This is one of the more scenic locations on the line to Kansas City and is very popular with rail fans. At Seymour, 474 approaches the Flasher Crossing of County Route J46 west of town. The Laredo Subdivision has just 13 miles remaining in Iowa before the state line. We leave 474 in Lucerne, Missouri, 70 miles from where we started our chase earlier in Ottumwa. After the train passes, a nearby defect detector sounds its report over the radio, with the train's crew acknowledging no defects.
Detector, mile 372.4, Laredo 43 degrees, axle 314, no alarms, length 5100, mile 372.4, out.
CSXT, Bidwell 46, loading bag, system 2, out for detector, extraction, Papa Chief 7659.
A couple years earlier, in July 2017, we made a shorter chase of another southbound, Sand Train 674. This train is powered by Norfolk Southern and BNSF locomotives, with the leader a remanufactured SD70ACU, a special class of diesels created from SD9043 Max purchased secondhand. Canadian Pacific would later enter into a similar rebuild project, upgrading a number of their own SD90s in the same manner. From Seymour, we jump across the state line into Missouri to see the train one more time in Powersville, 6 miles north of Lucerne. Now, let's fast forward to the present after the creation of CPKC. By November 2023, the railroad was enjoying several months of smooth operations, and as expected to meet growing demands, more trains were already being added to the Davenport to Kansas City line. A brand new service was rolled out shortly after the merger, known as the Mexico Midwest Express, or MMX, and showcased the railroad's new advantage of single-line service between the United States and Mexico. Southbound MMX Train 180 runs from Bensonville Yard outside Chicago through Davenport, Kansas City, Houston, and Laredo, and on to San Luis Potosi in Mexico. Train 181 runs north on the same route, bringing freight from Mexico to the U.S. As one of CPKC's hottest freight trains, the MMX hauls various commodities in intermodal containers with some auto traffic as well. Northbound Freight 181 approaches Ottumwa and its crew change. This particular MMX train is relatively short, but consists will lengthen over time as business grows. With the merger, most CPKC trains feature a mixture of locomotives from each predecessor, with Kansas City Southern leaders now common. The train begins its trip out of Ottumwa by tackling Rutledge Hill to climb out of the Des Moines River Valley. This long 1.7% grade is one of the steepest grades on the original CP network in the United States. In the past, some northbound trains were so long leaving Ottumwa that they'd have to be doubled or tripled up the hill, with the crew taking part of the train up the hill to Rutledge siding, then returning to the Ottumwa yard for the remaining sections, before hooking all sections together and continuing on. Most of the time today, long trains have DPU helpers in the middle and at the end of consist to make the hill in one shot. Today's 181 is short enough that extra locomotives aren't necessary. One of the recent projects in the area completed by CPKC was the repositioning of the south end of Rutledge siding. The siding originally came to an end just across the West Rochester Street grade crossing. Now it begins well past the crossing, making it easier to maintain since the switch tracks are no longer in the crossing itself. A switch heater for the winter months has also been added. New signals are in place, ready to be cut in, with the old Milwaukee searchlights now running on borrowed time. In just a couple weeks, they'd be gone. Time marches on, and soon it's a new year. We are in western Ottumwa as southbound train 250 descends Rutledge Hill and crosses the BNSF Ottumwa subdivision before passing us here at Gateway Drive. Train 250 and its northbound counterpart 251 are two more examples of increased traffic on this line. Mid-January 2024 was very difficult for everyone in Iowa as a pair of winter storms dumped over 2 feet of snow across the state in the same week. Dangerously cold temperatures followed, and while CPKC kept trains moving, several had issues getting up Rutledge Hill, some sliding backwards, almost becoming runaways. Thankfully, there were no accidents with BNSF at the bottom of the hill as the trains stopped in time, but scary situations for the crews nonetheless. By the time we ventured out again on January 27th, most of the operations had been stabilized from the storms. At milepost 297, 2 miles north of Rutledge Hill, we see southbound train 260 coming out of the fog towards Ottumwa. A year prior to the merger, CP renumbered many of its trains in the region, and these numbers carried over to CPKC. 260 is what used to be train 474. A little while later, a northbound train comes up the hill at the same location. Train 859 is a loaded coal train heading towards the Mid-American Power Plant in Fruitland near Muscatine. Loaded with coal from the Powder River Basin in Wyoming, this train operated over BNSF trackage before being handed off to CPKC in Ottumwa and retains its BNSF power the whole way. The following day, we're back along the tracks as 180 comes down the hill into Ottumwa. One of CP's SD70 ACU units is third in today's lash-up, and a large cut of general freight is also on the front end of the train. With 180 in the yard, northbound mixed freight 261 departs to climb Rutledge Hill out of town. The searchlight signals on Rutledge Siding's south end were removed in December 2023, and their removal has created a better vantage point to view approaching trains. Quincy Avenue is the first grade crossing on CPKC's Ottumwa subdivision as it runs out of the Ottumwa Yard towards the Des Moines River Bridge in the distance. This signal at the beginning of CTC territory is one of the last searchlights standing on the Davenport to Kansas City main line. As a result, it's well worth documenting as MMX train 181 departs the yard and splits the signal for its trip northward. In late February 2024, we chased southbound train 260 out of Ottumwa towards Blakesburg. After the merger, the Laredo subdivision was renamed to avoid confusion with a former Kansas City Southern subdivision of the same name. Today, the line south of Ottumwa is known as the Kansas City Ottumwa subdivision. Along with the usual CP and KCS diesels on this train, there are two more units in the lead lash-up, a Kansas City Southern SD40-2 and a former Union Pacific SD9043 Mac. This unit is most likely destined to become a parts source for CPKC's other units. Past Blakesburg, we're at the milepost 318.8 defect detector as 260 passes us one more time. Northeast of Ottumwa is the small town of Farson, Iowa. We are just outside Farson as another day's 260 approaches as it passes over the rolling hills typical of this stretch of railroad as spring 2024 begins. As 260 rolls into Ottumwa, we can see just how steep the tracks are up Rutledge Hill. Back at Gateway Drive, we catch another 260 as it descends Rutledge Hill across West 2nd Street and the BNSF main line. Today's consist features a Kansas City Southern leader with a Canadian National unit mid-train. A few miles outside of Ottumwa, 260 continues its trip an hour later with a new crew. This location is known as Bidwell. We've experienced a nice variety of action summarizing the daily traffic on CPKC's main line between Davenport and Kansas City. Now we're going to head north on a field trip to the Twin Cities to kick off some exciting events over the next couple months. At Union Depot in downtown St. Paul along the Mississippi River, a special train has arrived making headlines all over North America. To celebrate the first-year anniversary of the formation of CPKC, the railroad set out on a final spike tour in 2024, from Canada through the United States and into Mexico, featuring its business train made up of CP and KCS passenger equipment, classic CP diesels, and leading the train, Canadian Pacific 2816, the Empress, a 464 steam locomotive. Throughout the tour, the train would make special stops along the way to allow the public a chance to see the locomotive up close. Although steam trains occasionally visit Union Depot from time to time, most of the final spike route would be seeing steam for the first time in decades, and crowds came out in numbers to welcome the train at each stop and to see it pass countless trackside locations along the way. The train was already well on its way on the tour, having departed Calgary, Alberta on April 26th, making its way into the U.S. a few days later. They arrived in St. Paul on May 2nd, and the next day, the train ran to Union Depot for an afternoon on display. 2816 was built in 1930 by the Montreal Locomotive Works and was part of a series of 10 H-1B class steam locomotives made for Canadian Pacific. In nearly 30 years of operation, the engine pulled both freight and passenger trains in Canada before its retirement in 1960. A few years later, the engine made its way to the United States, where it was put on static display at Steamtown in Bellows Falls, Vermont, and later Scranton, Pennsylvania. In 1998, 2816 was reacquired by Canadian Pacific with intentions of restoring it to operating condition. It wasn't an easy task, as the engine had sat outdoors with little maintenance for over 30 years. But in 2001, just 3 years after its move from Steamtown, its restoration was completed, and 2816 ran a number of successful excursions, taking it to the far reaches of the CP system in both Canada and the U.S. over the next 11 years. Changes in leadership at CP discontinued the railroad steam program in 2012. But 10 years later, upper management was once again favorable towards reviving the program. With the anticipated merger with Kansas City Southern on the horizon, plans were made to overhaul 2816 once again and bring it out in grand fashion to lead its final spike steam train all the way to Mexico City, a celebration of the joining of both railroads' networks. In 2023, 2816's second restoration was finished, only months after the CPKC merger was finalized, and plans to take the engine on its three-country tour went full steam ahead. And that brings us to today, as we admire 2816 during its final spike steam tour, stopped in St. Paul, Minnesota. With every scheduled event stop on the tour, there were plenty of other things for families to do while visiting 2816 and its train. CPKC's miniature train, Puffer Belly Express, offered rides around the grass yard in front of Union Depot's station tracks. Inside Union Depot's concourse, representatives were on hand from rail-related authorities in the area, and there were other kid-friendly activities, plus a large display of operating O-gauge trains. In recent years, Union Depot has been transformed into a beautifully restored Twin Cities landmark. And along with restaurants and retail, it's still a very important railroad terminal. The city's modern Metro Transit light rail trains pull into their station in front of the depot, and passengers can take them west through St. Paul and into Minneapolis. On the main line, Amtrak's legendary Empire Builder calls on Union Depot each day on its cross-country journey between Chicago and Seattle. And just a few weeks after our visit, another Amtrak train would begin serving the Twin Cities, the Borealis, offering a second round trip each day to Chicago. It's been a great day along the railroad in downtown St. Paul. After 8 o'clock, 2816 and the Final Spike Steam Tour departs Union Depot for the short run to CPKC's Pig's Eye Yard for the night and a day of servicing on May 4th. On May 5th, we're south of St. Paul, still along the Mississippi River, in nearby Hastings, Minnesota, to see our first full run-by of 2816 in motion. Fans have gathered along the tracks anticipating the train's arrival. The Final Spike Special is preceded by Amtrak's eastbound Empire Builder, running on time out of St. Paul. The Builder operates on CPKC trackage the rest of the way into Chicago. With the Empire Builder clear, it's showtime as 2816 soon follows with its train. The Final Spike Special will continue south along the Mississippi River and across to Wisconsin. The next day, the train would arrive in the Chicago area for a display at Franklin Park, Illinois, near Bensonville Yard on May 8th. Then the train would head west on CPKC's former IC&E main line across northern Illinois towards Iowa. After a display in Davenport on May 10th, 2816 continued south the following day, approaching on familiar tracks in our neck of the woods. Just as in Minnesota, the sun is shining brightly as 2816's train arrives in Ottumwa in the late morning on May 11th, 2024. We chose to begin our chase at the base of Rutledge Hill near West 2nd Street with the BNSF crossing behind us. Where we're standing allows us to replicate a well-circulated photograph from 1960 of a Milwaukee Road steam excursion taken from roughly the same spot. It seems a fitting way to welcome a steam train back to Ottumwa for the first time in almost 20 years. In the Ottumwa yards, 2816 pauses for a change of pilot crews and brief servicing. Then the chase is on as we follow the train out of town on the Kansas City Ottumwa sub. The final spike steam special is seen rounding a sweeping curve past Blakesburg, and we later catch up with it again along the road in Sewal. Our 70-mile chase ends once again in Lucerne, Missouri, and there's definitely many more onlookers here compared to our last time with Freight Train 474 earlier in this program.
It's okay. It's okay.
Mile 372.4, Laredo 78 degrees. Axle 103, no alarm. 1520, mile 372.4, out.
CB 2816 south, northeast sector 372.4, out.
CP 2816 still has a long ways to go and many more stops in the weeks ahead. The train will arrive in Kansas City later in the evening and spend a week in the yards for routine maintenance and a boiler wash, then a display at Union Station. After that, the southbound trip continued through Missouri and Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas. After a display in Laredo on May 28th, the train crossed the border into Mexico for a triumphant run towards Mexico City. The train received a warm and rambunctious welcome, and it seemed as if the entire country turned out to see it passing. For many Mexicans, this was their first time seeing an operating steam train, as there's very little steam preservation in the country today. While the Final Spike steam tour continued south of the border, it's business as usual on the CPKC in southeast Iowa. Before 2816's return, let's pass the time with some more freight trains in the region. A mile north of Blakesburg, we see train 181, the hotshot intermodal from Mexico. .181 arrives in Ottumwa for a crew change and continues out of town. 30 minutes later, train 261 departs the yards and follows it up the Ottumwa subdivision. This train, with a Kansas City Southern de Mexico leader, works hard as it tops Rutledge Hill near West Rochester Street. More Kansas City Southern Power can be seen as we head out on a little adventure to Moravia on June 9th, 2024. We begin in Ottumwa as an overhauled SD70 Mack diesel pulls 3-ball, a special ballast train. About an hour later, the train is recrewed and continues south. We follow it onward and see it pass Bidwell. Three-ball takes the siding in Moravia as we see it at the north siding switch on the edge of town. The train will wait here to meet a pair of northbound freights. Now that the conductor has lined the switch back for mainline traffic, the northbounds can pass through. 261 isn't very far away, and we stick around to see it at the same spot.
CS 3903, conductor Farson reporting. North siding switch, Moravia. Line lock check normal.
Moving into town, the second northbound movement turns out to be 181 about an hour and a half later, as it races through at track speed. With all trains clear, 3-ball finally gets its chance to leave Moravia, heading out of the siding and back onto the main line. We end our chase for the day as the ballast train gets back up to speed as it continues towards Missouri to tie up for the night. Two and a half weeks later, it's time for more steam excitement as the final Spike Tour with CP 2816 makes its return trip through the Midwest. The passenger special arrived back in the United States on June 15th, making its way through the 17th to Shreveport, Louisiana for a 6-day stop featuring another boiler wash for the steam engine. The train continued north on June 24th and 3 days later departed Kansas City for Davenport. We'll be seeing the train at a number of spots in the Ottumwa area, beginning with a chase into town, starting out at the scenic trestles west of Blakesburg in Foster. Due to some issues with the F units in the consist, an additional diesel, a specially painted SD70 ACU, was added on for the trip into Mexico and back. Once receiving clearance, 2816 passes milepost 305 to enter the Ottumwa yard limits for a short service stop.
Over.
45 minutes later at 2:30, the final spike steam special departs Ottumwa for Davenport. With many other rail fans alongside us, we watch as the train reaches the top of Rutledge Hill in dramatic fashion. During 2816's stop in the Quad Cities, the locomotive was uncoupled from its passenger consist to make a run across to Silvis, Illinois on June 29th. The engine arrived on the grounds of Railroading Heritage of Midwest America's former Rock Island Railroad shops for a special display and run session. Although a day-long excursion on the Iowa Interstate Railroad was planned, it was later decided to incorporate 2816's presence with a free railroad safety day on the grounds, in conjunction with the nonprofit group Operation Lifesaver. Throughout the day, 2816 would occasionally go back and forth along one of the yard tracks extending to the far east end of the property, along with the short train pulled by Union Pacific Centennial locomotive 6936. Seeing 2816 show off for spectators at Silvis brings our look at the Final Spike steam tour to a close. The locomotive would return to its train in Davenport and depart the Quad Cities on July 1st. Just 3 days later, the train would be back in Canada, and on July 6th would make one final display stop in Winnipeg. Finally, on July 10th, 2024, the special would roll back into Calgary, its international adventure complete and its mission achieved. It's unlikely that we'll see another celebratory steam excursion like this for a while, but what it was part of continues. CPKC as a railroad is unlike any other Class 1 on the continent. The merger of CP and KCS, with the efficiencies created by linking three countries together across one rail network, is something that's definitely worth celebrating. As for the main line between Davenport and Kansas City, train counts are already up, and with the implementation of CTC signals between Cotter and Ottumwa, rail traffic is flowing very smoothly with capacity for even more growth. It's most certain the segment south of Ottumwa to Laredo, Missouri will eventually be signaled as well, bringing this line up to the status of what it is already becoming, one of the more important main lines in American railroading. Quite an amazing change of events from a time when this was just a feeder to Kansas City operated by smaller railroad companies. Things are looking good for CPKC here and all over their system, and it'll be interesting to see all of the further improvements that this railroad will develop in the years to come. This is Bobby Harvey. Thanks for spending some time with me along the tracks in Iowa, Missouri, and Minnesota as I documented perhaps the final large railroad merger in the United States. I'll see you next time.